So for the first time in his career, Steve Kerr is facing some real criticism, and I'm actually a little bit mixed on this. I've been critical of Steve Kerr for a while. I feel like the offense is outdated. I feel like his philosophy is outdated. I feel like this Zen master ego manager we label Steve Kerr has been a little bit exaggerated because he coaches Steph Curry, and we all know Steph Curry will just sit there quietly and won't say anything. But Steve Kerr absolutely deserves a lot of blame for what's happened the last 2 seasons, but it's just been an organizational thing to me. Starting with the Draymond Green situation, I don't even want to rehash that, but it's just been a top-down thing with the organization of no accountability for anybody except for the young guys. It's always the young guys that have to be accountable. The Warriors are always asking Jordan Poole and Jonathan Kuminga to be the mature one in these situations. When Anthony Lamb is playing significantly more minutes than Moses Moody all year last year, Moses Moody just has to sit there and take it just for the playoffs to come around, and then Lamb doesn't see the floor at all. And to me, that's where all logic goes out the window. Any defense you have of Steve Kerr goes out the window with that point. Because you could, if you really wanted to, you could make the argument that Anthony Lamb wasn't that bad. The Warriors needed a bigger body. He was knocking down his threes. It made sense to play him over Moody. I don't really believe that, but you could make that argument. Until the point where we get to the playoffs and Anthony Lamb is nowhere to be found, why did you just waste all that developmental minutes of Moses Moody and Kuminga on Anthony Lamb? Because the regular season told us you thought he was better than those guys, and then the playoffs come around and he's nowhere to be found. I understand the playoffs is matchup driven, but that is kind of like that just doesn't make sense, Steve Kerr. It makes no sense at all. And keep in mind, Wiggins missed a ton of time last year. Steph Curry missed time last year. I don't think GP2 even played until like the last week of the season or something like that, and Moody still wasn't getting consistent minutes. And then this year, I think the biggest problem right now is Chris Paul, and it's not even Chris Paul's fault. I think Chris Paul has been pretty damn good for this team, but Steve Kerr is always going to go Chris Paul. I think if we ask Steve Kerr in private with no one watching, who would he rather have close the game, Chris Paul or Steph Curry, I think he's taking Chris Paul. I really believe that. That's just the way a lot of coaches think. You want the point guard that's going to take care of the ball, not make mistakes, and that's what Chris Paul does. So it's hard to fault him in a lot of ways for going Chris Paul over Moody or Chris Paul over Kuminga. I think the Warriors should have known when they gave Steve Kerr that option that he was going to use it every time he had a chance to use it. I think Chris Paul has been pretty good. I think if there's a contending team out there that really needs a third ball handler on a team, they should go out there and try to get Chris Paul. But one of the ways I feel like it's a little bit unfair to Steve Kerr is Steve Kerr is taking a lot of bullets for Steph Curry. Because Chris Paul is in the game a lot of times because Steph Curry wants him in the game. Steph Curry doesn't want to have to handle the ball all the time. Steph Curry doesn't want to have to be the point guard all the time. And when you look at it, having Moody, Kuminga, Wiggins in the game together seemed like it would be a good idea, right? But you can't do that when Steph Curry wants to play this Reggie Miller, Ray Allen role, and I've explained that in previous videos, and actually a lot of people seem to understand what I was saying, but a few people took it the wrong way. And don't get me misconstrued, I think Steve Kerr has been terrible the last 2 years, I really believe that. But how much of the Warriors' problems would be alleviated just a little bit if Steph Curry just said, you know what, I'm the point guard. I don't need to be in lineups with Chris Paul. I can run the point guard. If I'm the point guard, that means Moody can play, Kuminga can play, Wiggins can play because I have the ball. They're not focused on getting me the ball. But when Steph Curry and Steve Kerr, I think it's both of them, want to play this style of basketball, it kind of makes sense to want Chris Paul in the game. And I feel like you just have to take that option away from Steve Kerr. Everybody's seen this coming. And I do think last night against the Denver Nuggets was a very bad look for Steve Kerr. But at the same time, let's not be emotional about it. Let's take a step back. They were dominating the game. He felt like it was a good time to get Saric more minutes, to get Wiggins more minutes. The Warriors should have closed out that game. That's not to excuse everything else he's done. But in that game, like Steph Curry, just close out that game. Just close out that game. The Nuggets went on a 25-4 run. Yes, Steve Kerr, you shouldn't just be sitting there on your hands. Get Kuminga back in the game. At the same time, though, just close out that game. I know I'm kind of talking in circles here, but that's kind of the Warriors situation. And that's why I do believe the Warriors should move on from Steve Kerr. There's just too much baggage, right? He can never coach this team with a clear lens on what's best for the team. It's almost impossible for him to do that. He's always going to lean toward the veterans. He's always going to lean toward the guys that got him 4 championships. or a guy like Chris Paul that he's been battling against for years. And I know Warriors fans don't want to hear it, but he is in a very difficult position because Moses Moody should be playing over Clay? No. Wiggins? No. Podziemski? No. Chris Paul? No, kinda. But Steph Curry, you got to be the point guard. If we're going to play Moses Moody over Chris Paul, Steph Curry, you have to handle the ball. Or we need Draymond Green to be in there as a secondary playmaker instead of Chris Paul. Well, Draymond Green, you need to stop getting suspended. Klay Thompson, you need to stop moping. Like, Steve Curry's dealing with a lot, so I don't want to just go all in on Steve Curry, even though I think he's been pretty bad the last couple years. I just think it's pretty clear they need a breakup. They need a breakup so they can go their separate ways so the Warriors can correctly assess this team. And I think the most underreported story going on in the NBA right now, and maybe it won't be after these Kuminga comments, is Steve Kerr has no more years left on his deal, right? This is it. He has not signed an extension. Before the season, I feel like everybody would have said Steve Kerr is likely going to be back. Now, I think most people would say, no, he's not going to be back as the coach. And if I was Steve Kerr and I got fired over the comments of Jonathan Kuminga after bringing 4 championships, I would be extremely hot at that. But it's not about that in particular. It's not even really about Kuminga or Moody as individual players. It's more about his philosophy, how he views things, how he seems to be a little bit behind on what's going on. And I'm trying to walk this thin line of being fair to Steve Kerr while also acknowledging he's been pretty bad. But it's always going to be something. If Wiggins has been pretty bad this year, right? But if, let's just say, why should he believe Wiggins is this terrible player and not the Wiggins from a couple years ago, or even last year, or even Minnesota Wiggins? Minnesota Wiggins versus this Kuminga, I'm not sure who's the better player. So when you guys are making it so simple as, oh, you just got to bench Andrew Wiggins for Kuminga, I don't think it's that simple. This season is clearly the outlier for Andrew Wiggins. I don't think he's just this terrible basketball player all of a sudden. So it's not that simple. You want to bench Klay Thompson? Earlier in the season, a lot of people were mad at Steve Kerr for playing Klay Thompson over Moses Moody. That's not an easy decision. I'm not sure that's the right decision. You want to bench Kevon Looney for Trayce Jackson-Davis? That one was a little bit more glaring, but also not just an easy decision to make. And that's why getting rid of Chris Paul is step one in figuring this out. Chris Paul has been very good, but if you take away Chris Paul, the decisions become a little bit easier. It becomes easier to get Moody in the game. It becomes easier to play Wiggins and Kuminga together if you're not worried about playing Chris Paul next to the greatest point guard of all time, in some people's eyes, Steph Curry. You don't need Chris Paul in that lineup, especially when you have Draymond Green, which it seems like the Warriors are going to have Draymond Green pretty soon. But I don't envy Steve Kerr's job. At the same time, though, this is what Steve Kerr's supposed to be the best at, right? Managing egos. He's doing a terrible job at that. The only 2 players that look like they're having a good time on the Warriors are the rookies, Brandon Podziemski and Trayce Jackson-Davis. Everyone else looks like they don't know what's going on, or they're completely disappointed in the season, or they don't know if they're going to play. Or Moses Moody's on the bench trying to be happy for his teammates, but he's not understanding why he's not in the game. It's a lot. It's a lot. And honestly, it's a little bit unfair to Steve Kerr, but the game is not about fairness. And I think the Warriors are going to move on, and I think they should move on from Steve Kerr. But it's not going to be because of these Kuminga comments, and it's going to be hilarious if he gets fired. He's not going to get fired during the season, right? That would just be crazy. That would be crazy. The Warriors are probably just going to get through the season and then act accordingly. But if he gets fired, don't put it on the Kuminga comments, because that's not what's happening here. We all see what's happening. It's a much deeper rooted issue. But if you're a Warriors fan, let me know in the comments down below how you feel about Steve Kerr, how you feel about Kuminga and Moody. Do you feel like they deserve more minutes? There's also the other side of people that say, why do they deserve minutes? And that's kind of an argument, but overall, just look at your team. They clearly deserve minutes on this team. But let me know in the comments down below how you guys feel about the current situation, and do you think Steve Kerr will be back as Warriors coach next year? My vote would be no. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I am out. Peace.